Helena Vega stared at her reflection in the mirrored glass of the 42nd floor, surveying the empire she had built with her own hands. Below, New York City pulsed with the frenetic energy she so admired. Efficiency, speed, productivity, words that defined not only her company, Vega Tech, but her very existence. At 45, Helena had transformed a small programming shop into one of the largest tech conglomerates in North America. Her story was retold in motivational speeches and cover stories. The girl who had grown up in a humble suburb, the daughter of a factory worker and a seamstress, now commanding over 3,000 employees. "Ms. Vega, the board is waiting," her assistant announced, interrupting her thoughts. In the boardroom, 10 men and 2 women, the select group that formed the board, awaited her arrival. "Last quarter's numbers exceeded our expectations," she announced without preamble. "We grew 17% compared to last year, even with the recession." Robert Mendez, the CFO, cleared his throat slightly. "Helena, there has been a 43% increase in employee turnover. We have increasing costs with new hires and training." "If they can't handle the pace, they know where the door is," she replied, with the coldness that had become her trademark. "Our selection process is rigorous, precisely to ensure that only the best remain." Darwinism is present in all spheres of life, including business. That night, a disturbing thought accompanied Helena to sleep. The empty look in the eyes of Thomas Silva, an employee in the operations sector, when she announced that everyone would be working the next 2 weekends. For a fleeting moment, Helena felt something she hadn't experienced in years: doubt. "I'm just reporting what the numbers indicate, Helena," explained Patricia Linz, the HR director. "The organizational climate survey shows alarming signs. The stress level is 60% above the industry average, and 72% of employees reported symptoms of burnout in the last 6 months. Helena shook her head dismissively. "Burnout is just another name for weakness. When I started, I worked 16 hours a day and didn't have time to feel exhausted." As she walked through the glass-walled corridors of the office, Helena noticed something unusual: the silence. It wasn't the silence of productive concentration, but something heavier, almost oppressive. Employees looked away when she passed. In the break room, Helena grabbed an espresso, discreetly observing the groups chatting in hushed tones. Fragments of sentences reached her. "A third person to leave this month. Impossible to balance. Did you see John? He looked like a ghost last week." Something bothered Helena. Not the implicit criticisms to which she was accustomed, but the feeling that her vision of her own empire might be distorted. That afternoon, during a surprise inspection, Helena stopped in front of Thomas Silva's workstation. There was something about him that had always caught her attention: the impeccable punctuality, the absence of complaints, the willingness to work extra shifts. "Silva," she called, making him jump. "How long have you been with us?" Five years, ma'am," he replied, nervously adjusting his glasses. "And are you satisfied with your position?" The question caught Thomas by surprise. Helena Vega never asked about personal satisfaction. "I appreciate the opportunity, ma'am. I do my best." Helena noticed the deep, dark circles under his eyes, the pallor, the subtle tremor in his hands. But she also saw something she recognized: determination. Thomas reminded her of herself 20 years ago. "Some critics claim that your management model based on extreme results is outdated," commented Renata Machado, the journalist, during an interview. "Recent studies show that companies with wellness policies exhibit greater long-term productivity and innovation. How do you respond to that?" Helena maintained her calculated smile. "The market doesn't wait. While competitors are busy creating decompression rooms, we're delivering concrete results to shareholders." Last week, a former Vega employee published a viral account describing the environment as toxic and dehumanizing. He mentions cases of depression, anxiety attacks, and even a colleague who fainted from exhaustion. Are you aware of these cases? Helena felt her blood boil. I don't give credence to anonymous accounts that aim to tarnish the company's reputation. At Vega, we value commitment. If some can't keep up with the pace, perhaps the problem lies with them. Later, Carlos Wong, a representative of an investment fund, went straight to the point in a crucial meeting. Ms. Vega, your reputation as a ruthless CEO is known worldwide, but we are concerned about certain aspects of Vega's organizational culture. Helena felt her stomach clench. Our culture is based on meritocracy and excellence. The results speak for themselves, undoubtedly. But financial results are no longer the only parameter. Sustainability and governance also include the well-being of human capital. We have received worrying information about labor practices at your company. The meeting ended without agreement. In the elevator, descending alone to the parking lot, Helena allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She punched the metal wall, feeling a sharp pain in her knuckles. She was losing control, and that terrified her. The damage to our image is incalculable, argued Carolina Prado, a member of the board. We lost 2 important contracts this week. Shares have fallen 7% since that viral account surfaced. I suggest an aggressive public relations campaign, intervened Marcelo, the marketing director. We can highlight our competitive advantages, perhaps implement some cosmetic improvements. No, said Helena firmly. We are not going to fake changes to appease social media. Robert, her right-hand man for years, surprised everyone. Helena, have you ever stopped to think that maybe, just maybe, they have a point? I also believed that extreme sacrifice was the only way, but we are losing brilliant people not because they are weak, but because they are smart enough to realize that there are other ways. Easier ways, Helena retorted, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. No. More sustainable ways. My daughter works at a startup that grew 200% last year. Do you know what the difference is? They treat their employees as people, not as resources to be exploited to the last drop. That afternoon, as she circulated through the company floors, Helena noticed something she had ignored for years: fear. Employees cringed when she approached. Conversations ceased abruptly. Forced smiles appeared like protective masks. In the break room, she overheard a conversation between 2 young programmers. My therapist said I need to set boundaries, but how do you do that here? It's practically a sin to leave at quitting time, said a young man with an exhausted look. I gave up, replied his colleague. I've already sent my resume to 3 companies. I can't stand waking up with anxiety every day anymore. At the end of the workday, Helena noticed Thomas Silva hurrying toward the elevators, carrying a small insulated bag. He seemed nervous, constantly checking his watch. On an inexplicable impulse, Helena grabbed her purse and followed him at a distance. Behind the wheel of her Mercedes, Helena kept enough distance to avoid being noticed as she followed Thomas's beat-up Honda Civic through the congested streets of New York City to a neighborhood on the outskirts. Driven by a curiosity she couldn't explain, Helena got out of her car and discreetly approached the house he entered. A side window allowed her to glimpse the interior without being seen. The scene she witnessed struck her like a lightning bolt. 2 children ran to Thomas as soon as he entered, their faces lit up at the sight of the insulated bag, which he opened on a simple table. From inside, he took out some Tupperware containers, obviously brought from the company cafeteria. Come and eat while it's warm, he said tenderly. The children attacked the food with an enthusiasm that suggested more than just hunger. An older woman, who Helena presumed was the grandmother, watched the scene with a worried expression. Daddy, the girl asked, will you be at breakfast tomorrow? The innocent question provoked a visible reaction in Thomas. His smile wavered for a moment. I'll try, honey. I have a meeting early, but I'll do my best. The boy interjected. You always say that, but you almost never make it. Helena recoiled, suddenly feeling like an intruder. She returned to her car, deeply disturbed by the scene. Tomas was the model employee according to her criteria: disciplined, productive, without complaints. If he worked so hard, why did he live in such modest conditions? Why did he need to take food from the cafeteria? Why wasn't he present at his children's breakfast? The answer insinuated itself into her mind: because the company she had built didn't allow him to have a life beyond its walls. Back at her apartment, Helena did something unprecedented. She ignored the reports that needed to be reviewed and opened her personal laptop. With hesitant fingers, she typed in the search bar: toxic corporate culture, consequences. The results were overwhelming: low long-term productivity, increased errors, impaired creativity, physical and mental health problems, destruction of family relationships. In a particularly impactful article, a psychologist argued that companies with abusive cultures were often led by people who normalize suffering in their own lives, transforming personal trauma into a business model. The words hit her like a stab in the back. Was that what she had done? Transformed her own history of sacrifices into an ideology imposed on hundreds of people. The next morning, she asked her assistant to check Thomas Silva's salary and benefits records. Despite 5 years of exemplary service, he received only the base salary for his category, without significant bonuses or promotions. His time record showed consistently extended hours, without adequate compensation. In his personnel file, Helena discovered something that made her feel ashamed. Thomas had been a widower for 3 years, taking care of his children alone with the help of his elderly mother. The news came like a bombshell. One of Vega's largest clients cancelled a 3-year contract, citing incompatibility with corporate values. The real reason was Vega's growing bad reputation as a work environment. In the crisis room, while executives debated strategies to contain the damage, Helena was strangely quiet. When she finally spoke, her voice cut through the chatter. "We are the problem." The conversation ceased abruptly. All eyes turned to her. "How many of you regularly work until after 10 at night?" Helena asked, walking slowly around the table. Hands rose hesitantly. "How many answer emails during the wee hours and weekends? How many have missed important events with family due to corporate emergencies that in retrospect could have waited? And how many of you feel truly happy with this life?" The hands lowered one by one, leaving only silence as an answer. "I created this," Helena continued with unprecedented vulnerability. "I created a machine that devours us from within, that turns brilliant people into exhausted shadows. And the worst thing is that I did it believing I was on the right path." The meeting ended with Helena's promise to present a transformation plan. That afternoon, she requested reports on the health status of employees. The data was alarming. Cases of anxiety and depression had increased 240% in the last 3 years. Leaves of absence for burnout tripled. Lucas Mendonça, an influential investor, entered her office without warning. "I heard interesting rumors today. They say the Iron Lady is considering softening up." "I'm re-evaluating aspects of our operational model," Helena replied diplomatically. Lucas laughed, a harsh sound. "You always said that only the strongest survive. And now, are you going to turn Vega into a therapy center?" "What I've noticed, Lucas, is that our company is full of people dragging themselves along, not strong people. If creating an environment that wears people down to the limit is a sign of strength, then I've failed to understand the true meaning of that word." "You're going to ruin everything you've built," he said, rising. "I'll call an extraordinary board meeting. If you're determined to follow this suicidal path, you'll have to convince more people." After Lucas left, Helena remained motionless, staring at the city beyond the windows. Perhaps she was making a monumental mistake, but something inside her insisted that this was the necessary breaking point. With renewed resolution, Helena called Patricia. "I need your help to completely restructure our approach to human resources. Can we start tomorrow?" Vega's auditorium was packed. Employees crowded into the seats, the side aisles, and the space normally reserved for the press. The murmur contrasted dramatically with the tense silence that usually preceded corporate announcements. Helena watched the crowd from backstage, feeling nervous. When she finally took the stage, she was greeted with polite but cautious applause. "Good morning, everyone," she began. "I called this meeting because we need to discuss fundamental changes at VegaTech." The tension in the room was palpable. Some managers exchanged apprehensive glances. Over the past 20 years, we have built a company that has become a benchmark for innovation and results. Our numbers are impressive by any traditional metric. She paused deliberately, observing how her managers relaxed slightly. "But we have failed in a fundamental metric, the well-being of the people who make those results possible." The murmur was immediate. Whispered conversations, confused expressions. "I made a mistake." The phrase, spoken with simplicity, cut through the noise like a knife. Helena had never admitted mistakes publicly. "I believed that success came only from efficiency and individual effort, but I neglected something essential: you. If a company grows at the expense of its employees' exhaustion, it is not successful, and that will change." The silence that followed had a different quality. It wasn't the silence of fear, but of absolute bewilderment. At the back of the room, Helena noticed Thomas Silver watching her with an indescribable expression. "From today, we will implement significant changes. First, all overtime hours will be duly compensated. Second, we will establish clear limits for working hours, including the right to disconnect outside of business hours. Third, we will review the entire salary structure to ensure fair compensation." The meeting extended for 2 hours, transforming into an unprecedented dialogue. For the first time, managers openly shared their concerns. Some admitted to having lost personal relationships due to constant pressure. Others confessed to health problems they hid out of fear. At the end, as the room emptied, Helena approached Thomas, who remained seated. "Silver." "Thomas," she corrected herself, deliberately using his first name. "I would like to invite you to join a special committee that I am forming. We need people who understand the reality of the shop floor." The surprise on his face was genuine. "Me? But I'm just a junior analyst. You have exactly what we need: integrity, dedication, and a perspective that we lack in the upper echelons." "Why me?" Thomas asked directly. "Because you represent everything I ignored for years. Dedicated employees who give their best, even when the company does not reciprocate adequately. People with family responsibilities who deserve more than just surviving." Something in Thomas's expression changed, a flicker of recognition, as if he sensed that Helena knew more about his personal situation than she let on. "What about the board? I heard rumors that some investors aren't thrilled." Helena smiled slightly. "I have a decisive meeting with them tomorrow. I may not be in this chair next week." "And you're still going ahead?" "Still," she confirmed with conviction. "Some things are more important than titles or power. It took me too long to realize that." "Vega, while we assess the impact of her recent decisions," Robert intervened promptly, "the bylaws guarantee the presidency the right to present its case before any deliberation on removal." With studied calm, Helena rose and began her presentation. She began with cold data: the cost of turnover, the lawsuits piling up, the talent lost to the competition, the damage to the corporate image. "The model we have adopted for 2 decades has become unsustainable, not only from a human point of view, but also financially. We are losing more money with the constant departure of talent than we would spend implementing more humane conditions." Lucas interrupted. "What about the productivity gains that our culture guaranteed? Is all that to be discarded because of a few employees who can't handle the pace?" "A few employees?" "According to our data, 47% of the team show symptoms of burnout. Absenteeism increased 32% in the last year. 3 strategic projects were delayed because we lost key developers. This isn't efficiency, it's systematic self-destruction. At one point, Lucas launched his most calculated blow. Helena, we all admire your career, but you built this company on principles that you now consider wrong. If your vision has been flawed for 20 years, how can we trust your judgment now? The silence that followed was exactly what Lucas expected. Helena could have backed down, moderated her position. Instead, she did something surprising. You're absolutely right, Lucas. I led this company based on an incomplete and in many ways harmful vision. I confused resilience with suffering, excellence with exhaustion. I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm asking for the opportunity to correct what I helped create. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Helena placed a sealed envelope on the table. Here is my letter of resignation, effective immediately. Should the board vote against the proposed changes, I will not lead this company back to the same path just to preserve my position. The vote was close. 7 votes in favor of the changes, 6 against. Helena would keep her position on the condition that she present monthly reports on the financial impact of the new policies. In the parking lot, Robert caught up with Helena. That letter, would you really have resigned? Helena looked at the urban horizon, at the building that had housed her life for so many years. Yes, she replied simply. Some things are more important than power. The next 3 months were the most challenging of Helena's career. Implementing a cultural transformation meant dismantling deeply rooted systems and facing unexpected resistance. The special committee, led by Thomas Silver and composed of representatives from all hierarchical levels, became the heart of the change. The dynamics were initially uncomfortable. Employees hesitated to speak openly in the presence of the CEO, feared for so long. You need to challenge me, Helena insisted. The old system worked based on fear and rigid hierarchy. If we maintain that dynamic, we will fail. Gradually, the barriers were falling. Helena discovered insights she never would have accessed in the old model, where only voices aligned with her vision were heard. The first big test came when a major client threatened to cancel a project due to delays. The kind of crisis that in the past would have triggered mandatory overtime and relentless pressure. Instead, Helena convened the project leaders for a frank conversation. What are our real options? She asked, without accusations. After an open discussion, a solution emerged that never would have in the old model, temporarily reducing the scope of the project, delivering essential functionalities on the promised deadline, and negotiating a second phase for the less critical elements. In the past, we would have just demanded the impossible, Helena reflected with Robert after the resolution. It's amazing what people can propose when they aren't paralyzed by fear. One Friday, something extraordinary happened. Helena, who normally worked late even with the new policies, decided to leave at quitting time. As she walked through the corridors towards the elevator, she noticed employees watching her not with fear, but with a kind of silent approval. In the lobby, she ran into Thomas, who was also getting ready to leave. End of the work day, Helena commented casually. Yes, he agreed. I promised the kids we'd get to the park early today. Helena smiled. They must be excited. They are, confirmed Thomas, relaxing slightly. If I may say so, it's still strange to leave on time without feeling guilty. Me too, admitted Helena, but I'm learning that efficiency isn't measured by hours of sacrifice, but by sustainable results. Why, Helena? Thomas asked unexpectedly. Why did you decide to change after so long? Helena chose the most essential truth, because I finally saw. I saw not just numbers and processes, but people. I saw you taking food to your children. I saw the real cost of the empire I built. And once you truly see, it's impossible to continue as before. Vega's auditorium had never been so full. 6 months had passed since the beginning of the transformation, and it was time to present the first results to everyone who was part of the company. "Good morning, everyone," Helena began. "6 months ago, I announced fundamental changes. I promised that we would work to create an environment where excellence didn't mean exhaustion, where results didn't come at the expense of balanced lives." On the screen behind her, graphs began to appear. Not just financial indicators, but metrics that had never been shared so openly. Turnover rates, recruitment costs, rates of medical leave. In the last 6 months, our turnover has fallen 34%. Absenteeism has decreased by 28%. Engagement has increased by 47%. The financial graphs showed an initial dip in productivity during the first 2 months, followed by a gradual recovery, and in the last month, an increase that surpassed previous levels. But the numbers don't tell the whole story. Helena left the stage, approaching the audience. The real impact is in the individual stories, like the developer who finally got to see her daughter in a school play, or the manager who started playing sports again after years, or still, her gaze found Thomas in the audience, or still the analyst who can now be present at his children's breakfast, building memories that no bonus could buy. The applause that followed wasn't perfunctory. It began hesitant, gained strength, and transformed into a genuine ovation. It was more than approval. It was recognition of a real transformation. Backstage, a surprise awaited Helena. Lucas was selling his stake in the company. "I prefer to invest in businesses that understand the traditional rules of the game. Good luck with your social experiment," he had written in his farewell letter. "Is this good or bad for us?" Robert questioned. Helena smiled. "It's an opportunity. His shares will be acquired by new investors, perhaps those who value what we are building." Later, alone in her office, Helena received an email with the results of the organizational climate survey. An anonymous comment caught her attention. "For the first time in 5 years, I don't feel fear when coming to work. For the first time, I feel I can be human here." Helena reread the phrase several times. In her previous world, she would have dismissed such sentimentality as irrelevant. Now, she understood that this simple statement represented perhaps the most significant achievement of her career. A full year had passed. Vega had been included for the first time in the list of the best companies to work for, an unthinkable achievement 12 months before. Robert entered her office with good news. "We just closed the quarterly financials. We're 22% above the most optimistic projections, and our operating costs have fallen 17%. Less overtime, fewer errors to correct, less turnover." That afternoon, Helena inaugurated the new corporate daycare center, a project that perfectly symbolized the paradigm shift. Installed in a space previously occupied by meeting rooms, the daycare offered care for employees' children. Among the crowd, Helena spotted Thomas, now a development manager, accompanied by his children who looked fascinated by the colorful children's space. After the event, she was approached by a journalist. "Ms. Vega, many executives argue that your approach only works because Vega was already an established company. What would you say to a startup that believes it can't afford to implement wellness policies?" Helena considered carefully. "I would say they are miscalculating the real costs. When we ignore human well-being, we pay in other ways, with reduced creativity, higher turnover, costly errors. It's not a question of being able to afford the cost of treating people well, but of recognizing that we can't afford the cost of treating them badly." As the event drew to a close, Helena noticed employees chatting relaxedly, interacting with the children, exchanging ideas in small groups. In the past, such behavior would be unthinkable. Everyone would be checking watches, fearing retaliation for unproductive time. She was approached by a woman she didn't immediately recognize. "Ms. Vega, I'm Anna Julia, Thomas Silver's wife." Helena smiled, extending her hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Anna Julia seemed nervous but determined. "I just wanted to thank you personally, not just for the changes in the company, but for bringing my husband back to us." Helena felt a lump in her throat, perfectly understanding the meaning of those words. Before, he was physically present when he could be, but mentally always absent, always worried, always exhausted, continued Anna Julia. Now, when he's with us, he's truly present. The children have their father back. Words of managerial gratitude Helena had received many throughout her career, for bonuses, promotions, career opportunities. But this appreciation touched on something deeper, more fundamentally human. It was a pleasant spring morning when Helena parked her car in front of the convention center. The annual Leadership and Innovation Conference brought together the biggest names in the business sector, and Helena had been invited as the keynote speaker. Backstage, she received extraordinary news. Vega had officially surpassed Global Tech, its main competitor, in market value. The company that had previously attracted Vega talent with promises of a more humane environment was now losing professionals to the new model established by Helena. "Ironic, isn't it?" Robert commented. "They were considered the example to follow, and now they're scrambling to copy our policies." Helena smiled, but without triumphalism. "It's not about winning a competition. If other companies are adopting more humane practices, everyone wins, especially the people who work there." When she took the stage, before 3,000 business leaders, Helena felt a surprising calm. She had an authentic story to share. Not abstract theories, but a real journey of transformation. 2 years ago, she began, "I was the kind of leader that many of you may still admire. Ruthless, focused exclusively on results, convinced that success and well-being were inevitable trade-offs." The frankness of the opening captured the attention of the audience. Executives didn't usually admit vulnerabilities on stages like that. "I built an empire based on the belief that only the strongest, or more precisely, those most willing to sacrifice everything, deserved success. I implemented this philosophy not only as a business strategy, but as a moral dogma. And I was completely wrong." Helena shared her journey without filters, from the moment of revelation observing an employee's family to the superior financial results that validated the new approach. "The biggest mistake we make as leaders," she concluded, "is confusing means with ends. Companies don't exist to generate profits. Profits exist to sustain companies. And companies exist to create meaningful value in the world, which is only possible through fulfilled people, not exhausted people." The silence was broken by an ovation that began slowly and grew until it became deafening. Business leaders rose in recognition not only of Vega's success, but of the courage needed to challenge established dogmas. At the cocktail party after the presentation, Helena was surprised by the approach of Lucas Mendonça. "Interesting speech," he commented without enthusiasm, but without the hostility that Helena would have expected. "Do you still think we're doomed to failure?" Lucas considered the question for a moment. "The numbers speak for themselves. It would be foolish to deny that your approach has produced impressive results. However," he continued, "I still wonder if it's sustainable in the long term." Soft cultures tend to soften over time. Instead of defending herself passionately, Helena smiled calmly. "Perhaps true strength lies not in hardness, but in flexibility. Rigid trees break in the storm. Those that bend survive." The next morning, Helena received an unexpected visit in her office. Thomas Silva knocked gently on the door, holding an envelope. "The kids made this for you," he explained, handing it over. "When they heard you were giving the big speech yesterday." Inside the envelope, Helena found a handmade card, decorated with colorful drawings and irregular children's letters. The message was simple, but deeply meaningful. "Thank you for giving us our dad back." Helena felt an unexpected emotion. No corporate award, no headline in a business magazine could capture so perfectly the real meaning of the transformation she had led. Later that day, Helena proposed something unprecedented to her leadership team. "I want to implement a formal human impact assessment system for all our strategic decisions. Just as we measure financial ROI, we need to measure the effect of our policies on people's well-being." As the meeting progressed, Helena observed the dynamics of the room. The mutual respect, the openness to constructive disagreements, the healthy combination of focus on results with genuine consideration for the human factor. This was the new Vega they had built together. At the end of the day, as the sun set, Helena stood before the wide window of her office, the same place from where, years before, she contemplated her empire with inflexible pride, without perceiving the cracks in the foundation. A discreet plaque on her desk captured the philosophy that now guided not only her business, but her own life. True success is not measured by what we achieve, but by what we help others achieve. As she walked through the office towards the elevator, employees greeted her with genuine smiles, not the fear disguised as respect that had previously characterized their interactions. Helena responded to each one by name, occasionally asking about projects or personal matters. This was perhaps the most significant change in her leadership, the ability to see people as people, not as resources, functions, or tools to achieve corporate goals. On the drive home, passing through the same neighborhood where she had followed Thomas 2 years before, Helena reflected on the transformative power of truly seeing, of allowing herself to look beyond the layers of corporate dogmas to the underlying human reality. That night, observing a simple family through the window had changed everything, not because it revealed something that Helena didn't know intellectually, but because it had broken the barrier between abstract knowledge and visceral understanding. The fundamental lesson wasn't that results didn't matter, but that the way to achieve them made all the difference. True success wasn't in isolated conquest, but in creating systems that allowed many to thrive together. Truly seeing, Helena murmured to herself. This had been the key to her entire transformation, the ability to see beyond numbers, goals, and corporate abstractions to the underlying human reality. The cycle had been completed. The leader who once defined success by the ability to ignore human limitations now defined it by the ability to recognize, honor, and nurture what was most human in all of us.